Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I thought that I would do a weekend reading report. So I like normally to do recent reads videos in which I touch upon the last 3 or so books that I have completed during the interim since the last recent reads video. Well, I am not doing a lot of reading or completing things at this time, and I don't expect to. I thought I would show you the books that I am in the middle of. Well, I did finish The Early Chinese Empires, Qin and Han, by Mark Edward Lewis, and it was everything that I had hoped for. It's a book that I had tried to read some years before and failed, and this time it was much smoother reading, and I think that I got a lot out of it. I'm a person who has spent his life sort of on the fringes of China and Chinese culture, and I've never had any good synthesis. I've never had any good timeline of periods, of events, that kind of thing. And I'm realizing that with this book, with this series of books, I am on my way to putting everything into place. Now he divides his books into 10 chapters, and all of he has done 3 books in this Harvard series. I'll show them to you in a second. And he divides them all pretty much in a similar way. So he begins with the geography. Chapter 2 here is a state organized for war. 3 is the paradoxes of empire. 4, imperial cities. 5, rural society. 6, the outer world. 7, kinship. 8, religion. 9, literature. 10, law. And as you progress, I'm a couple of chapters in on the second book in the series, and it's a nice breakdown because it lets you see how things have differed from period to period. So I really knew nothing about the Han Dynasty. One of the nicest things that came out of this was a poem, which I printed in the community tab, but I think I'll read it aloud just to let those who may not have seen the community posting hear it. Now there's going to be a phrase, double carp, which is referring to a letterbox. So it's about a woman who receives a letter from her husband who is at the front. Green, green the grass by the river. Endlessly my longing follows the distant road beyond imagining. And yet last night I saw him in a dream. In a dream I saw him by my side. Suddenly I woke, and he was in another land, each of us in different realms. Tossing and turning, I could see him no more. Withered mulberry feels heaven's wind. The ocean's water feels heaven's cold. Entering the house, each is naturally loved, but who deigns to speak to me? A traveler comes from far away. He brings me a double carp. I shout at the servant, cook the carp. Inside, there is a white silk letter. I kneel down and read the letter. What, after all, is within? First, it says, try and eat more. Last, it says, I will always remember you. And then Lewis follows up with a paragraph of his own. Here, the singer is a woman whose husband is serving in the army at the frontier, as indicated in the title of the poem. The entire poem narrates the woman's thoughts and experiences, with a second voice entering at the end in the words of her husband's letter. The passionate sorrow of the first voice, poetically expressed by beginning some lines with the last words of the preceding ones, provides a striking contrast with the prosaic but ultimately heartbreaking contents of the letter. I don't think I've had a poem at such distance in translation touch me so deeply as this one, and I'm glad that he included it. I wish he would do an anthology of ancient Chinese poems. So I've begun the next volume. Where is it? China Between Empires. So he calls it the Northern and Southern Dynasties. The unity of the Han Empire has dissolved, and so there is a period again of various competing states. So you get the three kingdoms, and there's a literary masterpiece titled The Three Kingdoms, which I have had on my docket for a long time. Now I know the historical context. And in this book, he talks about the influx of Buddhism, the spread of Taoism. In the last book, you learned about the court, how it became somewhat insular, and the court eunuchs and the relatives of the wife began to hold the real power in the realm. With the dissolution of the Han, or the collapse of the Han Empire, power is moving. So you have Han peoples migrating south, which they had even begun before that. And so I am, with personal experience, I am beginning to understand how the gardens in the city of Suzhou, which I visited 20 years ago, came to fit into the picture. The power is shifting more into the hands of the wealthy families. Even in the Runciman I was reading, there's always a dichotomy or a disparity between the official rule, the government, and then the wealthy families. And so in this case, the power is going more into the hands of the various families. It is becoming less safe on the roads, and so people are banding in different ways to try to protect themselves a little bit better. And culturally, whereas under the Han, everything was court-centric, everything had the imprimatur of the court itself. Now you are beginning to see literary works from outside regions, and in fact, these outer regions are beginning to make themselves felt in the Chinese literature and then Chinese painting, which is just beginning. So I was a bit disappointed in this, not really knowing why he omitted some of the artwork. I see that the oversight is being taken care of in later volumes. I also complained about the maps. I am finding the maps in this volume just a little bit better. And so for me, as I say, it's really filling in a lot of gaps that I have had. Pardon me for the interruption. So these books are part of a Harvard series of Imperial China. And so the first book covers the Qin and the Han. I believe that's how you would say it. Then you have China Between Empires. Then you get into the Tang Dynasty, which I believe is Southern. I'm just starting to pick this up. So these first 3 volumes were written by Lewis himself, Mark Edward Lewis, whose writing I like. I quoted an excerpt from him in my video about 10 historians who write stellar prose. So then I believe it will be The Age of Confucian Rule by Dieter Kuhn. I don't know the author. The Troubled Empire by Timothy Brooke, who is the editor of the series. And lastly, William T. Rowe, China's Last Empire. So I'm hoping when I finish the series, I will have a good handle on the broad sweep, which I have always been lacking and always yearned for. I've bought a couple of older books that were 1-volume histories of China and just could not get into them. I was not satisfied with the presentation. So my goal is to continue reading China Between Empires, and then if I am so inclined and still enjoying it, then to barrel into the 3rd book. I'm not so sure about these. It would be ideal for me to just keep on and read the whole set, but since they are not the same author, I may decide to give it a break. So probably in another month's time, I will not yet have finished anything except possibly one of the Lewis books. So there won't be material for a recent reads video. The other book which I am reading is George Eliot's Daniel Deronda. I was, at the beginning of the month, people were starting to post about Victober. Victober is a booktube event in which Victorian literature is highlighted during the month of October. And October is going to be a very busy and hectic month for me. I may get very little reading done. So I decided that I was going to start early, and I didn't know, should I read this or this? And ultimately, I decided to stick with the tried and true. I'm not sure about Wilkie Collins, even though everybody has good things to say about him and about this book in particular. But I am a huge fan of George Eliot. First, many years ago, I read Middlemarch. A few years ago, or a couple of years ago now, I read Romola, which I loved. Last year, I read Silas Marner, which I felt pretty good about. And I ultimately decided that since I know reading is going to be tough for me in the imminent future, I wanted to go with something that I'm very comfortable with and something that I have great expectations for. So I have read, this volume is 800 pages long, and the thing is divided into 8 books, and each book is about exactly 100 pages. So, so far I have finished 2 books plus 2 chapters, and if I'm lucky, I will finish this by the end of Victober. So that is my definite hope for George Eliot. And as it stands, I think that this is on course to becoming my favorite book by Eliot. The first 2 books have gone through flawlessly. There has not been anything that I haven't liked. Very little, just after 2 books are some of the plot happenings starting to show themselves. The first 2 books, everything was pretty low-keyed, a basic introduction of all the characters and their various situations. I'm sure there are details that were dropped that will come into play further on, but I am just loving, sentence by sentence, every bit of the writing in this book. And so I'm not trying to rush through it. I'm taking my time. And with any luck, I will finish it sometime during the month of October. If I do manage to finish it faster than expected, then I will possibly pick up Wilkie Collins. Jennifer Brooke, or is it Brooks, the booktuber who recently died about 6 months ago, I think, loved Wilkie Collins, and I do want to read something in her memory. So the only other thing I have going, well, I have The Elements by Euclid, translated, I think, by Sir Robert Heath in a Dover edition. And I read the first chapter of that and just have set it aside and not done any more. But it continues to play in my mind. And so I have not taken it off the docket or the cart. It is still on my in the works pile. And the only other thing I've been reading has been Henry Adams' The History of the United States. This volume, Volume 2, covers the history of President Madison, who is, Volume 1 covered Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson actually came across more likable than I would have expected. I think because, to some degree, things fell a little bit out of his control, and all of his great theories, all of his ideals or whatever, wound up being sacrificed to realities. So, as a character, you found him in more likable circumstances because things were just not going his way, particularly at the end of the administration. He only wanted to get out of it with his reputation intact, and he failed at that. So he left his successor, James Madison, with a tough load of problems to deal with. And I don't care for Madison very much at all. He seems inept. He seems passive to the point of doing nothing. I keep hoping that he is going to redeem himself. Similar accusations were leveled against Abraham Lincoln, you may recall. But Lincoln, through the course of his presidency, his short presidency, grappled with the problems confronting him and mastered the situations he was dealing with as well as any human being might. You don't get any sense with Madison that he is grappling with anything. He's just letting things happen. You don't sense that he's trying to figure things out. He's started a war, basically a war of conquest against Canada. People think it was at Napoleon's bidding, and there is no evidence to the contrary. And I give the rumors credibility. And he's not, say, as with Lincoln, taking an interest in the war at all. He's just handing it off to his Secretary of War, a man named Armstrong. And so as it has devolved into just a blow-by-blow description of the war, it feels like Adams is padding the narrative a little bit. There was an entire chapter devoted to how American sailing was better than that of the British during the war. The ships were better and the tactics better. And it was very interesting, don't get me wrong about that, but I don't know that it needed a whole chapter. And then with the actual battles, which seem for the most part to be incompetencies on the American side facing incompetencies on the British side. Just a lot of stupidity all around. He's going into the battles in such detail that I find myself thinking I really don't need to know so much. Just a summary would have done. It paints a good picture. You understand a lot more about the character of all these various generals, and just the situation that these armies were facing. And of course, a lot of it is sea battles, and he goes into great detail about the size of the ships, the length of the ships, the width, the number of cannons, the number of crew, which all almost mathematically determines the outcome of any confrontation between any two. There was just recently a really interesting battle, and let me see if I can show it to you. Oh no, it was not that. Oh yeah, there it is, at Plattsburgh, and I cannot tell you about it, but here's a map, and the the British were trying to get in, and the American ships were these here: the Eagle, Saratoga, Thunderoga, and Preble. And he goes into great detail talking about the American, I don't know what it is, captain, admiral, the guy in charge, and now I forget his name, McDonald or something like that, and just how he was like the younger Navy men on the American side. He was really on the ball, and how he prepared for this confrontation. And it really makes for riveting reading. If I were a huge military fanatic, I would probably love it even more. It's not really my thing. So I think Volume 2 is about 100 pages longer than Volume 1 was. And I think he could have tightened it up a little bit and edited things out. But he presented this one in 3 separate volumes, whereas the first Library of America binding is 2 volumes in Henry Adams's original. But so far it's good. My plan is to try to finish this before the end of the year. As I say, this month coming up is going to be so hectic. I make it my habit to read a chapter the last thing before I go to bed. Sometimes it's hard to do, and I'm just trying to force myself when I'm dead tired, or sometimes I will take a little nap and then wake up with a couple of moments of freshness in which I can do it. Some nights, of course, I can't. And some of the chapters in this seem to be a little bit longer. So previously it was all 17 pages, something like that. And that was well in my comfort zone for a before bedtime read. And lately they've been more 20 pages. There was one that was 25 or something like that. I had to split it up. I just couldn't do it. But it's worthwhile. And so I'm striving mightily to keep on track with this because I want to finish Henry Adams before the end of the year. And number one, I'd like to read a book by Gary Wills about this book. And number two, I want to read Francis Parkman's history of the French and the English in the Americas prior to the independence. So it's just something I've been aware of. I have the copies, and this Henry Adams experiment of doing a little bit each night and devoting a solid year to it has been working. I find that you have to come up with different strategies to get through some of these books. And so if it takes a year, that's fine. That's all it takes. And then at year's end, then you've done it. I remember years ago I studied Tai Chi, and Master Liao would talk about how when you learned different movements, different forms they would be called, people progress at different rates. And one guy, maybe it would take him 10 repetitions, and he would have it. And for each person, it might be different for a different form. And another person, it takes 100 repetitions, and another person, it takes 1,000 repetitions. But he said it doesn't matter. As long as you do that, then at the end of it, then you've got it down. And so there's no real difference. I mean, that was his point. But the point for me is, so it takes a year. At the end of the year, if I didn't do this, I would still be alive, but I wouldn't have read it. So it all works. So this is just a summing up of what I have been reading. And you may not be hearing from me so much next month. As I say, I don't expect to be doing a lot of reading. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.